The morning fog hung thick over Coastal Naval Academy as Emma Martinez stepped out of the taxi, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The imposing brick buildings seemed to tower over her small frame, their windows reflecting the gray October sky like watchful eyes. She had arrived 3 weeks into the semester, which meant she was already behind, already different, already a target. Emma pulled her jacket tighter as she walked toward the main administration building. Other cadets moved in groups across the courtyard, their uniforms crisp and their movements synchronized from months of training together. She could feel their stares following her civilian clothes and uncertain steps. Being the new girl at any school was hard enough, but at a military academy where tradition and hierarchy ruled everything, it felt impossible. "You must be Martinez," said a stern voice behind her. Emma turned to see a woman in her 40s wearing the uniform of a senior instructor, silver bars gleaming on her collar. "I'm Commander Walsh, your advisor. You're late for orientation." "I'm sorry, ma'am. The flight was delayed, and then the taxi got lost." Commander Walsh held up a hand. "Excuses don't fly here, cadet. You'll learn that quickly enough." She looked Emma up and down with critical eyes. "Follow me. We need to get you processed and into uniform before lunch." As they walked through the corridors, Emma noticed how other cadets stepped aside for Commander Walsh, offering sharp salutes and respectful nods. The walls were lined with portraits of distinguished graduates, their faces serious under peaked caps, their chests decorated with ribbons and medals. Emma wondered if she'd ever belong in a place like this, surrounded by such tradition and excellence. "Your academics are impressive," Commander Walsh said as they entered her office. "Top of your class at civilian high school, perfect SAT scores, fluent in 3 languages. But this isn't high school anymore. Here we break you down first, then build you back up into something stronger." Emma nodded, trying to appear confident, despite the knot forming in her stomach. She had wanted this opportunity desperately. When the acceptance letter arrived, it felt like a miracle. Her single mother had worked 3 jobs to support Emma's education, and a full scholarship to the Naval Academy was their ticket to a better future. "You'll be assigned to Delta Company," Commander Walsh continued, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your company commander is Cadet Captain Jessica Reynolds. She's tough but fair. Your roommate is Cadet Sarah Chen. Both will help you adjust to life here." But even as Commander Walsh spoke about support and guidance, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her real challenges wouldn't come from academics or physical training. She had noticed the way some cadets had looked at her in the courtyard, not just curious but calculating. There was something predatory in their expressions that made her skin crawl. After receiving her uniform and room assignment, Emma made her way to Delta Company Barracks. The building was old but well-maintained, with polished floors that reflected the overhead lights. Room numbers were painted in neat black digits beside each door. She found room 247 and knocked softly. "Come in," called a voice from inside. Emma opened the door to find a petite Asian girl sitting at a desk, textbooks spread before her. The girl looked up with a warm smile that immediately put Emma at ease. "You must be my new roommate," the girl said, standing to extend her hand. "I'm Sarah Chen, 2nd year." "Emma Martinez, thanks for letting me share your space." Sarah laughed. "Trust me, it's nice to have company again. My last roommate transferred out after first semester. Couldn't handle the pressure." She gestured to the empty bed across the room. "That's yours. Not much space, but you'll get used to it." As Emma unpacked her few belongings, Sarah filled her in on the daily routine, the instructors to watch out for, and the unwritten rules that governed cadet life. But when Emma asked about other cadets in their company, Sarah's expression grew more serious. "There's something you should know," Sarah said, lowering her voice. "There are some cadets here who, well, they have a tradition with new students, especially ones who arrive mid-semester." "What kind of tradition?" Sarah glanced toward the door, then back at Emma. They call it testing. It's not official hazing, that's strictly forbidden. But they find ways to push new cadets, to see if they'll break under pressure. Make no mistake, they're smart about it. Nothing they do can be traced back to them officially. Emma felt her stomach drop. What kind of testing? It varies. Sometimes it's practical jokes that cross the line. Sometimes it's social isolation. They might spread rumors, hide your gear, report false infractions to instructors. The goal is to make you want to quit. Has anyone ever stopped them? Sarah shook her head sadly. The ringleaders are all from influential military families. Their fathers are colonels, generals, admirals. They have protection that regular cadets like us don't have. The administration tends to look the other way as long as nothing gets too serious. As if summoned by their conversation, there was a sharp knock at the door. Sarah's face went pale. "Come in," she called reluctantly. The door opened to reveal 3 cadets in perfectly pressed uniforms. The leader was a tall, blonde girl with cold blue eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Emma recognized her immediately as the type who had ruled her high school through a combination of charisma and cruelty. "You must be our new addition," the blonde girl said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Cadet Captain Jessica Reynolds, your company commander." Behind her stood 2 other cadets, a red-headed boy with freckles and a brunette girl with sharp features, both watching Emma with undisguised interest. "Emma Martinez," Emma replied, standing straighter. Something in Reynolds' tone put her immediately on guard. "Martinez," Reynolds repeated, as if tasting the name. "Interesting. Not exactly traditional Naval Academy stock, are you? Tell me, Emma, what brings a girl like you to our little corner of military tradition?" The question was loaded, and Emma knew it. She had faced similar challenges before, people who looked at her last name, her appearance, her background, and made assumptions. But she had learned to stand her ground. "The same thing that brings anyone here, I imagine. A desire to serve and excel." Reynolds smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Admirable. Of course, desire isn't always enough. The Academy has a way of separating those who truly belong from those who are just visiting." "Is that a threat?" Emma asked quietly. "Threat?" Reynolds laughed, and her companions joined in. "Why would I threaten a fellow cadet? We're all on the same team here. I'm simply pointing out that the Academy can be challenging for those who aren't prepared for its unique demands." Sarah stepped closer to Emma, a show of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by Reynolds. "Of course, if you ever need guidance or support," Reynolds continued, her tone becoming even more patronizing, "my door is always open. We take care of our own here, don't we?" The 3 visitors left as abruptly as they had arrived, leaving Emma and Sarah alone in the suddenly quiet room. "That was a warning," Sarah said immediately. "Jessica Reynolds is the worst of them. Her father is a 3-star general, and she acts like she owns this place. The redhead is Tommy Morrison. His dad is a Navy captain. The brunette is Lauren Price, daughter of a Marine colonel." Emma sank onto her bed, suddenly feeling the weight of her situation. "So they've already marked me." "It looks that way. But Emma, there's something else you should know. They don't just target anyone. They go after cadets they see as threats, people who might challenge their little kingdom or show them up academically or in training. What makes you think I'm a threat to them?" Sarah studied her new roommate carefully. "Your test scores, for one thing. Your language skills. The fact that you got in here mid-semester on a full scholarship despite not having any military connections. Girls like Reynolds don't like being shown up by outsiders." That evening at dinner, Emma noticed how the social dynamics played out in the mess hall. Reynolds and her circle sat at a central table, holding court like royalty. Other cadets either sought their approval or carefully avoided their attention. Emma and Sarah found seats at a quieter table near the windows, but Emma could feel eyes on her throughout the meal. They're planning something, Sarah whispered as they picked at their food. I can tell by the way they keep looking over here and whispering. Emma tried to eat normally, but her appetite had vanished. She had faced bullies before, but never in an environment where she couldn't simply walk away or go home at the end of the day. Here she was trapped, dependent on these people for everything from meal times to room assignments. After dinner, as they walked back to the barracks, they passed a group of first-year cadets huddled together near the entrance. One of them, a thin boy with nervous eyes, was speaking in hushed tones to the others. They got Johnson last month, he was saying. Started with small things. His uniforms would go missing. His assignments would disappear from his computer. Then someone reported him for infractions he never committed. By the time he figured out what was happening, his demerits were through the roof. What happened to him? Another cadet asked. Gone. Transferred out during midterms. Said he couldn't handle the stress. But everyone knew the truth. Sarah grabbed Emma's arm and pulled her past the group before they could be noticed. Once they were safely in their room, Sarah closed the door and leaned against it. You heard that, right? That's what they do. They make life so miserable that you quit on your own. That way there's no investigation, no questions asked. Emma sat on her bed, mind racing. She thought about her mother, working late nights to make ends meet, believing in Emma's dream of becoming a naval officer. She thought about the opportunity this place represented, not just for her, but for her entire family's future. I'm not going to quit, Emma said finally. Sarah looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. I hope you mean that, because once they start, they don't stop until you're gone or they find someone new to target. As they prepared for lights out, Emma made a mental inventory of her resources. She was smart, determined, and used to fighting for what she wanted. But she was also alone, outnumbered, and facing opponents who had every advantage. What Emma didn't know as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the barracks settling for the night was that Reynolds and her followers were already meeting in a storage room 2 floors below, planning her downfall with military precision. The scholarship girl thinks she can waltz in here and fit right in, Reynolds was saying to her assembled conspirators. It's time we showed her where outsiders really stand in our world. They had no idea that Emma Martinez carried a secret that would soon turn their carefully ordered world upside down. But that revelation was still days away, and Emma would have to survive their initial assault before the truth could protect her. The test was about to begin, and Emma Martinez was completely unprepared for what was coming. The harassment began subtly, just as Sarah had warned. On Emma's 3rd day, her morning alarm mysteriously failed to sound, causing her to miss formation and earn her first demerit. The next day, her laundered uniforms disappeared from the community washing room, forcing her to wear a wrinkled backup that drew disapproving looks from instructors. Equipment failures happen, Reynolds said with mock sympathy when Emma mentioned the missing uniforms during company meeting. Perhaps you should be more careful with your belongings. Emma bit back her response, knowing that any complaint would only make things worse. She had dealt with subtle bullying before, but never with such calculated precision. Every incident was designed to appear accidental, giving her no recourse for formal complaints. By the end of her first week, the pattern had escalated. Emma's homework assignments would vanish from her computer, forcing her to redo hours of work. Study materials would be moved from where she had left them. Her bed would be found unmade during surprise inspections, despite her having made it perfectly that morning. The stress is getting to you, Sarah observed one evening as Emma frantically searched for her missing calculus textbook. They're trying to break you down psychologically before they move to more direct tactics. Emma finally found the textbook stuffed behind a radiator in the common room, its pages slightly damaged from the heat. She clutched it to her chest, feeling tears of frustration threaten to spill over. I can't prove any of this, Emma said quietly. Every time something happens, There's a reasonable explanation. Missing uniforms could be stolen by anyone. Computer glitches happen. Maybe I really did forget to make my bed properly. That's the genius of their method, Sarah replied grimly. They make you doubt yourself before anyone else even has a chance to doubt them. The social isolation was perhaps worse than the practical sabotage. Emma quickly realized that associating with her was becoming a liability for other cadets. Conversations would stop when she approached groups in the mess hall. Study groups would suddenly be full when she tried to join. Even some cadets who had initially been friendly began avoiding her as word spread about Reynolds's disapproval. Sarah remained loyal, but Emma could see the strain it was putting on her roommate. Sarah's own social standing was beginning to suffer by association, and Emma felt guilty about dragging her down. "You don't have to stick by me," Emma told her one evening after Sarah had been pointedly excluded from a study session. "I understand if you need to protect yourself." Sarah looked offended. "I'm not abandoning you. Besides, they'll move on eventually, they always do." But privately, Sarah was beginning to worry. The harassment against Emma was more sustained and systematic than anything she had seen before. Usually, Reynolds and her group would make their point and move on to other targets. The fact that they were maintaining such focused pressure suggested something different about this situation. The answer came during Emma's second week, when she overheard Tommy Morrison talking to another cadet near the library. "Reynolds is obsessed with this Martinez girl," Morrison was saying. "I've never seen her put this much effort into breaking someone. Usually, a few pranks and some social pressure is enough." "Why is this one different?" the other cadet asked. Morrison lowered his voice, but Emma could still hear from her hiding spot behind the stacks. "I think it's because Martinez is actually better than her. Did you see those test scores that got posted accidentally last week? Martinez aced the tactical assessment that Reynolds barely passed, and word is that Martinez speaks perfect Spanish, French, and Portuguese. Reynolds has been trying to learn Arabic for 2 years and can barely order coffee." The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. She wasn't just being hazed. She was being systematically destroyed because she represented a threat to Reynolds' carefully constructed image of superiority. That night, lying in bed, Emma made a decision. She couldn't fight back using the same underhanded tactics Reynolds employed, but she could excel so clearly and obviously that no amount of sabotage could hide her capabilities. She would beat them at their own game by playing a completely different one. Emma threw herself into her studies with renewed determination. When her computer assignments were deleted, she had already made backup copies. When her textbooks were hidden, she had already photographed the relevant pages. She began arriving at formations 15 minutes early, making her bed with military precision that would survive any inspection, and completing assignments days before they were due. Her performance in tactical exercises became impossible to ignore. During a complex navigation exercise, while other cadets struggled with basic compass readings, Emma not only completed the course in record time, but identified 3 errors in the provided map coordinates. In foreign language assessments, she demonstrated fluency that impressed even the instructors. "Martinez is making us all look bad," Emma overheard Lauren Price complaining after a particularly challenging international relations exam. "She's curve-wrecking every test." Reynolds's response was swift and vicious. If subtle sabotage wasn't working, she would escalate to more direct confrontation. It happened on a Thursday evening during mandatory study hours. Emma was working alone in the library when Reynolds approached with her usual entourage, plus several cadets Emma hadn't seen before. Older students with the bearing of upperclassmen. "Emma Martinez," Reynolds said, her voice carrying across the quiet library. "We need to talk." Emma looked up from her textbook, noting how other students were quickly gathering their materials and leaving the area. Within minutes, the section was empty except for Emma and Reynolds's group. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Reynolds continued, sitting down across from Emma without invitation. "You seem to be under the impression that you can come into our academy and immediately start showing off." "I'm just trying to do well in my classes," Emma replied carefully. "Are you? Or are you trying to prove something? Trying to show that an outsider can come in and be better than cadets who have been here for years?" Emma closed her textbook slowly, recognizing that this conversation was inevitable. "I'm not trying to prove anything to you or anyone else. I'm here to learn and to serve." "To serve," Reynolds repeated mockingly. "How noble. Tell me, Emma, what exactly qualifies you to serve? What military tradition do you come from? What family legacy are you upholding?" The questions stung because they touched on Emma's deepest insecurity. She had no family military tradition, no legacy of service, no connections to fall back on. She was here purely on merit, which made her vulnerable in ways that other cadets weren't. "My qualifications are the same ones that got me accepted here," Emma said evenly. "Scholarships," Tommy Morrison interjected with a sneer. "Diversity initiatives, quota filling." Emma felt her face burn with anger, but she kept her voice level. "My test scores." "Test scores don't make a naval officer," Reynolds said. "Breeding does. Honor does. Knowing your place in the chain of command does. Things that can't be taught to just anyone who walks in off the street." "What do you want from me?" Emma asked directly. Reynolds smiled coldly. "I want you to understand your position here. You're a guest in our institution. Guests should be grateful for the hospitality they receive and should avoid making their hosts uncomfortable. And if I don't? Then your stay here might become very unpleasant. More unpleasant than it has been so far." The threat was clear, and Emma realized that her strategy of excelling academically had only made things worse. By succeeding despite their sabotage, she had escalated the conflict to a point where Reynolds felt her reputation was at stake. "I see," Emma said quietly. "And what would make my hosts more comfortable?" "Transfer out," Reynolds said simply, quietly, voluntarily. "Claim the academic pressure was too much. No one would blame you. It happens all the time." Emma looked around at the assembled group, seeing the expectation in their faces. They truly believed she would crumble under this pressure, that their advantages of birth and connection would ultimately triumph over her academic abilities. "I need some time to think about it," Emma said finally. "Of course," Reynolds said, standing graciously. "Take all the time you need, but don't take too long. Things have a way of getting complicated when decisions are delayed." After they left, Emma sat alone in the empty library section, shaking with anger and fear. She had never felt so isolated and helpless. Every path forward seemed to lead to defeat. If she complained to the administration, it would be her word against multiple cadets from influential families. If she stayed and continued to excel, the harassment would only intensify. If she left, she would be abandoning her dreams and disappointing everyone who believed in her. That night, Emma made a desperate decision. She needed to call home, to hear her mother's voice and maybe gain some perspective on her situation. Cadets weren't supposed to make personal calls except during designated hours, but Emma felt like she was drowning and needed someone to throw her a lifeline. She waited until after lights out, then crept down to the communication center on the first floor. The duty officer was dozing at his desk, and Emma managed to slip into one of the phone booths unnoticed. Her mother answered on the third ring, sounding groggy but immediately alert when she heard Emma's voice. "Mija, what's wrong? You sound upset." Emma tried to explain her situation without revealing too much detail. She talked about difficulties with other cadets, about feeling like she didn't belong, about wondering if she had made the right choice in coming to the academy. Her mother listened patiently, asking gentle questions and offering the kind of unconditional support that Emma desperately needed. But as the conversation continued, something her mother said made Emma's blood run cold. "You know, Emma, I should tell you something I never mentioned before. When you got accepted to the academy, I was so proud I called your grandfather to tell him. Emma frowned. Mama, Abuelo died when I was 5. What do you mean you called him? Not my father, mija. Your father's father. Your other grandfather. Emma's world seemed to tilt sideways. What? Mama, what are you talking about? You always said my father's family wanted nothing to do with us. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. That's not exactly true. It's complicated, Emma. Your father's family, they're not ordinary people. When your father died in that training accident, I was so angry with the military, with everything. I wanted to raise you away from all that. What kind of people? Emma asked, though part of her was beginning to guess. Your grandfather on your father's side is Admiral Roberto Martinez. He's a very important man in the Navy, Emma. When you told me you wanted to join the Naval Academy, I thought about contacting him, but I didn't know how. We haven't spoken since your father's funeral. Emma dropped the phone, catching it just before it hit the floor. Admiral Martinez. She had heard that name in her military history classes. He was one of the most respected and feared officers in the entire Navy, a man whose influence reached into every corner of naval operations. Emma? Are you there? I'm here, Mama, Emma whispered. Does he know about me? He knew about you when you were little. He wanted to be part of your life, but I was too hurt, too angry to let him. I thought I was protecting you from a world that had taken your father away. But Emma, if you're having trouble at the academy, maybe it's time. Emma hung up the phone in a daze, her mind reeling with this revelation. She had spent weeks feeling powerless, isolated, convinced that she had no one to turn to for help. But all this time, she had a grandfather who could probably end her harassment with a single phone call. The question was whether she wanted to use that connection. Everything in her rebelled against the idea of solving her problems through family influence rather than her own merit. But as she crept back to her room, Emma began to realize that she might not have a choice. Reynolds and her followers had escalated their campaign to the point where Emma's very survival at the academy was at stake. They were counting on her lack of connections, her isolation, her vulnerability. They had no idea that they were about to discover just how wrong they were about Emma Martinez and her place in the naval hierarchy. Tomorrow, Emma would have to decide whether to continue fighting alone or to reveal the trump card she never knew she possessed. Emma spent a sleepless night wrestling with her decision. By dawn, she had made up her mind. She would handle this situation on her own terms, without using her grandfather's influence. She had gotten into the academy through her own merit, and she would survive through her own strength. But fate had other plans. The crisis came during Friday's tactical exercise, a complex simulation designed to test leadership under pressure. Cadets were divided into teams and given competing objectives in a mock naval engagement. Emma found herself assigned to Reynolds' team, an arrangement that was clearly no accident. The exercise took place in the Academy's Advanced Simulation Center, where computer-generated scenarios could test every aspect of naval command. As the team leader, Reynolds had the authority to assign roles to her subordinates. She placed Emma in the position of communications officer, a role that required constant interaction with external command structures. "Remember Martinez," Reynolds said as they took their positions at the control stations. "In this exercise, chain of command is everything. You take orders from me and only me. Any unauthorized communications will result in automatic failure." Emma nodded, understanding that she was being set up. Reynolds was creating a scenario where Emma would either have to fail the exercise or disobey direct orders, either of which would result in serious disciplinary action. The simulation began with their destroyer facing a complex threat scenario involving enemy submarines and hostile aircraft. Reynolds immediately began issuing contradictory and confusing orders, clearly attempting to create chaos that she could later blame on Emma's incompetence. "Martinez, contact Fleet Command and request immediate air support," Reynolds ordered. "Air support request transmitted," Emma confirmed, following proper protocol. "No, wait," Reynolds snapped seconds later. "Cancel that request. Tell them we don't need assistance." Emma hesitated. Military protocol was clear. Changing orders without proper justification could endanger real lives in actual combat situations. But this was just a simulation, and arguing with Reynolds would only make things worse. "Cancellation transmitted," Emma reported. For 20 minutes, the exercise continued with Reynolds issuing increasingly erratic commands. Other team members began exchanging worried glances as it became clear that their performance was suffering badly. The simulated enemy was gaining tactical advantage while Reynolds seemed determined to create failure rather than success. Then the communications system chimed with an incoming priority message. Emma checked the transmission and felt her blood run cold. The message was marked with classification codes she had never seen before, indicating communication from the highest levels of Naval Command. "Communication incoming from Fleet Command," Emma reported, following protocol. "Tell them we're busy," Reynolds said dismissively, not even looking up from her tactical display. Emma stared at the message header, her hands trembling slightly. The transmission was addressed specifically to Cadet E. Martinez and originated from Admiral Roberto Martinez, Commander of Naval Operations, Atlantic Fleet. "Ma'am, this message is specifically for me, and it's marked Priority Override." Reynolds turned around, her face flushing with anger. "I don't care if it's from the President himself. In this exercise, all communications go through me. You will ignore that message and focus on your assigned duties." Emma looked at the message again, then at Reynolds, then at the other cadets who were watching this confrontation with growing alarm. She realized she had reached a moment where she could no longer remain silent about her family connections. The direct order from her grandfather couldn't be ignored, even in a simulation. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I have to take this message." "You will do no such thing," Reynolds shouted, loud enough to attract attention from other teams working in the simulation center. "I am giving you a direct order to ignore that transmission." Emma opened the message and read it quickly. What she saw made her knees weak. Her grandfather wasn't just sending a routine communication. He was announcing an inspection visit to the academy the following week, and he was asking Emma to prepare a private briefing on current cadet training methodologies. "Martinez!" Reynolds was practically screaming now. "Close that message immediately, or I will have you brought up on charges of insubordination." The commotion had attracted the attention of Commander Walsh, who was observing the exercise from the control booth. She moved quickly to Emma's station, her expression stern. "What's the nature of this disturbance?" Commander Walsh demanded. Reynolds immediately launched into an explanation about Emma's refusal to follow orders, painting herself as the wronged authority figure dealing with an insubordinate subordinate. But Commander Walsh's attention was focused on Emma's communication screen, where the message header was still visible. Commander Walsh's face went through a remarkable transformation as she read the transmission details. Her stern expression melted into something approaching shock, then quickly shifted to professional concern. "Cadet Martinez," she said quietly, "please step aside with me for a moment." As they moved away from the simulation stations, Commander Walsh spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Is Admiral Roberto Martinez your family?" Emma nodded reluctantly. "My grandfather, ma'am. My father was his son." Commander Walsh closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, she looked like someone who had just realized she was standing in a minefield. "Cadet Martinez, how long have you been experiencing difficulties with your chain of command?" The question was loaded with meaning, and Emma understood that Commander Walsh was asking about more than just the current exercise. This was her moment to either continue handling things on her own or to finally reveal what had been happening to her. "Since I arrived, ma'am. Nothing I could prove, but—" Emma trailed off, unsure how much to reveal. "I see." Commander Walsh looked back at the simulation area, where Reynolds was still loudly complaining to anyone who would listen about Emma's behavior. "Cadet Martinez, I want you to write a detailed report about your experiences here. Every incident, every interaction you found problematic. I want it on my desk by 800 tomorrow morning." "Ma'am, I don't want any special treatment because of my family." "This isn't about special treatment," Commander Walsh cut her off. "This is about maintaining proper standards of conduct at this institution. If what I suspect has been happening actually has been happening, then we have a serious problem that goes far beyond family connections." Meanwhile, Reynolds had noticed the private conversation between Emma and Commander Walsh, and her expression was shifting from anger to uncertainty. Something about the commander's body language suggested that this situation was not developing the way Reynolds had expected. "Is there a problem?" "Commander Walsh?" Reynolds called out, trying to sound casual, but failing to hide her growing anxiety. Commander Walsh returned to the group, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "The exercise is concluded. All cadets return to your dormitories. Cadet Captain Reynolds, please remain behind for debriefing." As the other cadets filed out, Reynolds approached Commander Walsh with what she probably thought was confident authority. "Ma'am, I hope you understand that Cadet Martinez showed clear insubordination during this exercise. I was simply trying to maintain proper discipline when—" "Cadet Captain Reynolds," Commander Walsh interrupted, "are you aware of Admiral Martinez's relationship to this institution?" Reynolds blinked, confusion evident on her face. "Admiral Martinez? Which Admiral Martinez?" "Admiral Roberto Martinez, Commander of Naval Operations, Atlantic Fleet, 4-star Admiral. The man who will be inspecting this academy next week, and who will personally review all cadet records as part of his evaluation." Understanding began to dawn on Reynolds' face, and with it, a growing sense of horror. "The Admiral Martinez who just sent a priority communication to his granddaughter, Cadet Emma Martinez," Commander Walsh continued relentlessly. "The same Cadet Martinez who you just accused of insubordination for following proper protocol in responding to a communication from a 4-star Admiral." Reynolds's face had gone completely white. "His granddaughter? Did you think to ask about Cadet Martinez's family background before you began whatever campaign of harassment you've been conducting? Did you think to wonder why a mid-semester transfer student might have received a full scholarship to our academy?" The word harassment hung in the air like a sword over Reynolds's head. She started to speak, then stopped, apparently realizing that anything she said could only make things worse. "I want to see you in my office at 600 tomorrow morning," Commander Walsh continued. "Bring with you a complete list of every interaction you've had with Cadet Martinez since her arrival. Every conversation, every exercise assignment, every disciplinary action you've recommended or considered, everything." Reynolds nodded mutely. Her earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "You are dismissed." Word of the incident spread through the academy with the speed that only military gossip can achieve. By dinner time, every cadet knew that Emma Martinez was Admiral Martinez's granddaughter, that Reynolds had been called to account for her treatment of Emma, and that a 4-star Admiral would be personally inspecting the academy within days. The social dynamics that had defined Emma's experience completely reversed overnight. Cadets who had avoided her for weeks suddenly wanted to sit at her table. Study groups that had excluded her were suddenly eager for her participation. Even upperclassmen who had never acknowledged her existence were nodding respectfully as she passed in the corridors. But the most dramatic change was in Reynolds and her inner circle. The confident arrogance that had defined their behavior was replaced by obvious anxiety. They moved through the academy like people walking on thin ice, careful and subdued. Tommy Morrison was the first to break ranks. He appeared at Emma's dormitory room 3 days after the incident, looking nervous and contrite. "Emma, I wanted to apologize," he said when Sarah opened the door. "For everything. The pranks, the harassment, all of it. I know it doesn't excuse what we did, but I want you to know that I'm sorry." Emma studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity, but finding only genuine remorse. "Why now, Tommy? Because you found out about my grandfather?" "Partly," he admitted honestly, "but also because what we did was wrong regardless of who your family is. I let myself get caught up in following Jessica without thinking about what we were actually doing to you." Emma appreciated his honesty, even if the timing was suspect. "Thank you for the apology. I accept it." Lauren Price followed with a similar apology the next day, though hers seemed more motivated by fear than genuine remorse. Other members of Reynolds's group also made overtures toward reconciliation, each clearly trying to distance themselves from their previous actions. Reynolds herself remained notably absent from these apologetic visits. The Admiral's inspection visit was announced officially 3 days later, sending the entire academy into a frenzy of preparation. Every surface was scrubbed, every uniform pressed to perfection, every regulation reviewed and re-reviewed. Emma found herself in the surreal position of being consulted about her grandfather's preferences and expectations. Instructors who had barely acknowledged her existence suddenly wanted her input on inspection protocols and presentation details. "It's like watching an entire social order collapse and rebuild itself overnight," Sarah observed as they watched cadets scrambling to prepare for the Admiral's visit. "A week ago, you were nobody. Now you're the most important person in the academy." Emma felt uncomfortable with the dramatic reversal. "I don't want to be important because of my family name. I want to be here on my own merit." "Maybe," Sarah said thoughtfully, "but sometimes family connections aren't about special treatment. Sometimes they're about getting the fair treatment you should have had all along." When Admiral Roberto Martinez arrived at the academy, he commanded respect through presence alone. He was a tall man in his 70s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. His uniform was impeccable, his bearing dignified, and his reputation preceded him like a force of nature. Emma met him privately in Commander Walsh's office before the official inspection began. It was the first time she had seen her grandfather since childhood, and she felt nervous and uncertain about how to approach him. "Emma," he said simply, standing when she entered the room. "You look like your father." The words hit her harder than she expected, bringing tears to her eyes. "Admiral, grandfather, I don't know what to call you." "Roberto will do fine when we're alone," he said gently. "I understand you've been having some difficulties here." Emma found herself telling him everything about the harassment, the sabotage, the systematic campaign to drive her out of the academy. She also told him about her determination to succeed on her own merit and her reluctance to use family influence to solve her problems. Admiral Martinez listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grim as the story continued. "Emma," he said when she finished, "seeking justice when you're being wronged isn't using special privilege. It's standing up for the principles this institution is supposed to represent." The formal inspection proceeded flawlessly, with every aspect of Academy operations showcased for the Admiral's approval. But everyone knew the real purpose of his visit was to address the systemic problems that had allowed a culture of harassment to flourish. His final meeting was with the Academy's senior leadership, including Commander Walsh and the superintendent. Emma wasn't present for that discussion, but its results became clear soon enough. Jessica Reynolds was quietly asked to withdraw from the academy. No formal charges were filed, no public accusations made, but her departure was swift and final. Several other cadets received formal disciplinary actions ranging from demerits to suspension. More importantly, new policies were implemented to prevent similar incidents in the future. Anonymous reporting systems were established, oversight procedures were strengthened, and the culture of protecting well-connected cadets from consequences was systematically dismantled. Emma remained at the academy where she excelled academically and eventually graduated near the top of her class. She went on to have a distinguished naval career, earning respect through her own achievements rather than family connections. But she never forgot the lesson she learned during those difficult weeks at the academy, that sometimes justice requires more than individual strength and determination. Sometimes it requires people with power to use that power responsibly to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The cadets who had planned to test the new girl learned their own lesson, that assuming someone lacks power or connections can be a very dangerous mistake. In a world where family names and personal networks still matter, underestimating someone's background can lead to consequences far beyond what any test or harassment campaign could achieve. Emma Martinez had proven that she belonged at the academy not despite her background, but because of everything it had taught her about perseverance, justice, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you're standing alone.